There was one gentleman in upstate New York I interviewed who was having all kinds of very scary encounters. He didn't like it at all. But following his experiences, he started hearing voices in his head to approach people and give them psychic readings. He walked up to one woman and said, "You need to go home right now." He didn't know this woman. This was on the streets of New York City. She's looking at him like he's crazy. He says, "No, you need to go home right now." Because he could hear the grays in his head saying, "You have a mission, you need to do this." And it was a couple of years later, he saw this same woman in a grocery store in the line next to him. He's like, "Oh no, that's her." Because she recognized him and came running up to him. She says, "You're that man. You're that man who gave me that message, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And she became very tearful and said, "I just need to thank you because I did listen to you." And I went home and I had the most wonderful evening with my husband. And he died that evening in his sleep. So there you go. This is another indication and why I think the ETs are a positive force in people's lives. I know contact can be very scary, but if you look objectively at the onboard UFO experience, you will see that people are often physically examined. This can be quite frightening, but this is when they are healed. They're often taken down into the engine room and shown how the craft powers itself, taken up to the observation deck and shown the stars, the moon, planets, the earth. They were taken into the control room and even taught how to fly the craft. I've got several cases of this. And they are often given warnings or spiritual information of some kind. The ETs warn people about nuclear proliferation, pollution, our warlike ways, the dangers of greed and corruption, the destruction of the environment. All of these are very positive things. There is a very fear-based media that is putting forth very scary stories, which I think are largely not true. Misinformation, disinformation, and very much focused on the fearful aspects of people's experiences. When most people I talk to will say that, yes, initially it was very scary. I'm not even sure I like this or agreed to it. But after having further encounters, do get over their fear, realize this was something they chose, and realize this is one of the most special aspects of their life and has completely spiritually transformed them. And it's something they wouldn't change for anything. They look upon it as a very positive experience. So this can be physically transformative as well. I talked to a lady who lived in an apartment building in Mount Rainier, Washington, who woke up one evening to light coming into her window. And next thing she knew, there were these little grays coming towards her. They were dressed in like silver jumpsuits, and it completely freaked her out. She was not expecting this. She lives in an apartment building. And she doesn't really remember much except waking up the next morning. She was on top of her blankets in a position that she could not have been in accidentally. So she had some physical evidence of activity, not just her memory of it. She felt quite ill that morning, but went to work anyway and was feeling fluish and nauseous, and went to turn on her computer, and her computer immediately blacked out, went offline. So she called the IT guy and asked him to fix her computer and went to the copier. So she goes to the copier and the copier starts malfunctioning and it breaks, goes offline. And she calls the IT guy. She's like, "After you're done with my computer, can you go fix the copier? I'm sorry, I don't know what I did." And he kind of looked at her annoyingly and said, "Fine." And she went to go fax something and broke the fax machine. And that's when she realized that there was something about her that was breaking these machines. And I had to laugh. I couldn't help it because I've heard this so many times. I talked to a former Marine officer who had become a welder at a car factory, and he had to operate a very expensive welding machine, which had electrical components. And every time he would go on it, he would blow all the fuses. It happened so many times, his superiors forbade him from using the machine and actually ordered him to have a a physical exam to try and figure out what was going on. And they couldn't figure it out. There was another lady I interviewed who had encounters, and same thing. She said watches would go off on her. They didn't work. She went through light bulbs like nobody's business. Same with the Marine officer, the welder. Street lights would go off when she walked under them. And sometimes she would know before it would happen. She was walking with her boyfriend once and said, that street light is about to go off. And he just kind of looked at her like she was crazy, but then it went off. Not only that, the entire line of street lights went off. So I think what's going on here is a person's bioelectric field is being enhanced and enlarged perhaps, or something is going on here which changes the bioelectric field of a person to where it does affect machines. You hear this all the time from contactees. They will fuzz up radios, TVs, computers. They have all kinds of problems. Another lady I talked to woke up one day to see grays surrounding her bed. She had no fear. They did not paralyze her. She says they were quite friendly. They looked very cute, in fact. And they said, we need to measure the amount of light in your body. And they had this sort of probe-like instrument. And next thing she knew, she was being escorted out by the ETs out of her home. She really doesn't remember what happened next. But she did later have encounters where she did remember being taken on board. And the purpose of this meeting was warnings. And this is, again, what I hear many times. And they told her that our planet, due to the way we are treating it, is facing many earth changes, that there will be future wars, that there's going to be floods, earthquakes, tsunamis, landslides, tornadoes, hurricanes, and you need to tell people and warn them about the fact that you are on the wrong pathway, that you're on a pathway towards self-destruction. Again, this is the most common message that people get beyond don't be afraid, have no fear, no harm will come to you. She did later have a very close-up sighting with her daughter and her daughter's friend while out at the fire pit in front of their home. But she says they healed her of chronic back pain, and following that, she found that she herself had the ability of healing other people's backs. She had her cat come in severely injured by a raccoon attack and prayed to the ETs to heal them. Her cat disappeared and came back completely healed. This is one of several cases I've researched in which animals have been healed. Dogs, cats, monkey at a zoo who had leukemia, horses, many cases of this. So certainly not just people. Okay, I'm going to move a little bit more quickly because I don't want to go too much over the hour here, but I do have a few more cases I'd like to share with you. I interviewed another gentleman from Canada who had a gray enter into his bedroom. He thinks it was a gray. It only happened once when he was a little boy, so he kind of discounted it. But following this, he became very interested in astrophysics and astronomy and quantum physics and science, and also environmentalism and the state of our world and peace on Earth. And these sort of esoteric subjects, the pyramids and so forth, it just completely transformed his life following this visitation when he was a little kid. And as an adult hearing about UFOs, he heard about CE5 work, calling down UFOs, and decided to try it with his girlfriend while camping out in the wilderness in the Ontario area of Canada, and were amazingly successful. After a short meditation, a UFO showed up, put on a little display, which they will do. I think they are showing themselves on purpose often, and that's what happened here. And then he had a very unusual encounter when he was camping at Wasaga Beach in Canada, one of the largest freshwater beaches. And he was walking out with his friends along the beach late at night. He had convinced them to take a walk when they saw some very strange figures off in the distance. And suddenly all of his friends couldn't move. They were paralyzed, but he wasn't. And he was very much baffled by this. And the next thing he knows, he's standing in front of these strange figures right by the shoreline there. And he says, I think, and you're gonna laugh at me, but I think they were about 10 feet tall. I'm like, really, 10 feet? And he said, well, you know, they could have been 9 feet tall, but I'm 6 feet tall myself, 6'2". And I had to look up to see them. And he told them, you shouldn't be here. And they said, we can come and go as we want. And that's all he really remembers. Next thing he knows, he's walking back home with his friends, and then completely forgot the whole experience until 2 weeks later when they went camping again, and it all flooded back into his head. And he asked his friends, do you remember seeing those strange guys down at the beach? And his friends were like, oh yeah, I do remember that. They couldn't see him very well because it was a couple hundred yards distance, but they were all very blasé about it, very casual. And the guy I interviewed didn't really want to say, oh, they were ETs, because he hadn't told his friends he was having contact and so forth. So he didn't really elaborate with them on what he experienced. But he said this was a transformative experience. And although this particular experience was quite frightening, it really deepened his sense of spirituality. And he was a very successful businessman, but became somewhat of a philanthropist following this. So again, this is a pattern we see. People who are doing good work for humanity are the ones who are being contacted. One gentleman I interviewed is a doctor, Dr. Dudley Delaney, who always had an interest in UFOs, but didn't think he was a contactee. One time he had a beam of light come down and strike him when he was in bed, but didn't think much of it. It wasn't until one day he woke up in bed, the time he was suffering from prostate problems. He was quite elderly at this time. And he felt that this ET basically was probing him, and he heard the word tumor. And the ET said he would heal him. So he was very much encouraged by this. There was no fear. And he got a good look at this figure, and it was not human. At this point, he realized he was not in his room. And the next thing he knows, the experience is over. And following this, his prostate problems disappeared, though he was diagnosed with another illness. I'll get to that in a second. But following this, he became very much interested in Edgar Cayce, who was a very well-known psychic. He went and visited the Edgar Cayce Foundation at Virginia Beach and realized that Edgar Cayce was very much about healing. And so he got into alternative healing after he himself was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And he researched alternative healing methods for multiple sclerosis because some of the traditional healing methods don't work that well for some people. And ended up writing a book about it, and has many testimonials of how effective the research he's done on healing multiple sclerosis is. So here again, this is that pattern we see. He's a very religious guy, and this only strengthened his religious beliefs. But he says that he also became deeply spiritual as well. Okay, I'm going to move quickly and try to wrap this up in about 5 or 10 minutes. One lady I interviewed lived in Prunedale, California, in Northern California. And as a little girl, had these little lights coming into her bedroom. She thought they were fairies. She didn't think much about them. But as a young girl, her room would light up with lights, and these figures would come in. And she says it was absolutely horrific. Scared the living daylights out of her. Her parents were extremely strict. She got no support whatsoever from them. She wondered if this was, some sort of abusive situation, but there was no one who was abusing her. But she said it just got so bad, she finally moved out of the house at age 18 to the East Coast. And after relaxing she did see a UFO very close up during her childhood as well. So it became clear to her that this was probably UFO related, but she didn't want to face it until she had moved away. And then looking back on her somewhat traumatic childhood, she realized, I think this was aliens. And that really frightened her. So she didn't want to face that fact. But it was around this time she started having tinnitus really bad, but it wasn't tinnitus. She went to the doctor. He's like, no, you don't have tinnitus. She's like, well, maybe it's a bug in my ear. Because she kept hearing this weird scratching and this weird beeping tone. And he's like, no, there's no bug in your ear. And it would always get really bad whenever she was intimate or expressing affection to her husband. So that was curious to her. And one day she looked up and she saw this UFO over her house and she screamed at it. She's like, did you put an implant inside me? She was surprised to hear herself say these words because she had not even thought of that possibility. But then one day she woke up, she was hearing these tones again. She's walking around thinking it's music or something coming from somewhere in her house. And that's when she realized it was coming from her head. And this weird sort of geometric beam came into her house through the wall and pulled her on board a craft where she saw grays, and they were holding a baby and asked her to hold it and give it love. This is something I've heard from many people. The ETs are very much interested in our abilities to give affection to these hybrid babies. I'm somewhat shortening her story here because I'm running out of time. But she was quite traumatized by this, even though the ETs told her to look outside and she could see the earth far below. And that was basically the extent of the experience. Following that, her husband did see grays coming into the room. And this is when she started to notice a spiritual transformation. She could see and hear ghosts. She could see people's auras. She started giving aura readings. She would never charge any money, but she started telling people, you know, you need to do this to heal yourself, or she'd give hands-on healing. And at one point, she got into telepathic contact with the gray. He introduced himself as Sen. She said, are you planning on taking over our planet? He said, no, we have no interest in your planet. You guys are very emotional, quite violent. You've polluted your planet. It's far too crowded. We have access to many planets. She asked, why are you contacting me? They said, we are very interested in your emotions. We've had some problems with our genetics. We are using your genetic material to help reinvigorate ours. We've had some problems with reproduction and emotions. And we're trying to bring that back into our race. They threw a lot of science at her. She's a science writer. She's very much a left-brained person, but became incredibly spiritual following her encounters. And it's a much longer story, but I won't get into it. The last contactee case I want to talk about real briefly is Dolly Safran, who I wrote an entire book about her case because it's incredibly extensive. At age 14, she was pulled on board a craft, had missing time, but vowed that she was going to remember this time because she had suffered from missing time all the way up to age 14, and she did remember. And on board, she remembered basically being given a tour of the craft. She remembered all of her previous encounters, just like Don Anderson, all the way down to just a few months of age. Recalled past lives as well. I mean, she recalled everything. And the ETs were very friendly. She recognized them. Here's the ET pictured on the left here. She calls Mama. It's a tall gray. And here's a little AI gray. These are the ETs she's in contact with. And the ship itself is conscious. This was something a number of contactees had told me. Like, I feel like these ships are alive. And it's true. And they actually taught her how to fly the craft. They asked her, what would you like to learn from us? And she says, I'd like to learn how to fly the craft. And this became basically her mission in life. And she had hundreds of encounters in which they taught her how to fly the craft. And it's all done through psychic connection. So this is a very important fact. And Dolly, like many contactees, is profoundly psychic. As a little girl, she recalled they were taking her on board regularly to what appears to be another planet. They were teaching her not only science, but ethics and morality and psychic development and all kinds of subjects. And she was experiencing a wide variety of paranormal events as a child, including telekinesis, physical levitation, precognition, mediumship. I mean, it goes right down the list, healing, and more. So her case is probably the most extensive case of UFO contact I've ever researched. But again, her main focus has been learning how to fly these craft, which may sound unusual, but I can tell you it's not. I've heard this from many other people. In fact, Grant Cameron, a Canadian researcher, has just put out a book called Sky Pilots, in which he profiles over a dozen people who were taught by the ETs how to fly the craft. And again, yeah, it's always psychically. I would like to talk real briefly about healing, because this is a big part. I think this is one of the primary ET missions. All these people pictured here on the left are prominent UFO researchers. And I can tell you, I have documented more than 300 cases of healings from pretty much every major researcher out there. This is absolutely a primary aspect of UFO experiences, onboard experiences. This is one of the reasons why people are being taken on board. And this is why I think that any claims that ETs are hostile, malevolent, or here to take over, it's absolute rubbish. That's not what the evidence shows. And it's not me saying this. I would point to Barbara Lamb and John Mack and Edith Fiore and Ray Hernandez and many other prominent researchers, Timothy Good. I could go on. The ET mission is largely one of healing, guiding, teaching, and waking us up to our own psychic abilities. And one message they do give to most contactees is, we are you, you are us, we are one. One healing case is that of Jonathan Hunter Gray. He is a social worker, award-winning. He had your typical onboard experience with Grays. They injected him in various parts of his body, his lymph nodes, various organ systems. And following this, he noticed more than 20 physiological improvements. He grew another 3 inches. His feet increased a couple of sizes. His wrinkles started disappearing. His scars went away. His hair started growing much faster. He quit smoking. His nails were growing much faster. He stopped getting colds and flus every year. His son, who was with him, also noticed physiological improvements, but not to the degree that John Hunter Gray did. One more case real quickly comes from Jacques Vallée, who interviewed a medical doctor, there's that pattern again, who was struck by a beam of light from a UFO, healed of an axe wound on his foot, and partial paralysis from injuries received years earlier during the Algerian War. A very interesting case, because in the weeks following this incident, the doctor started experiencing precognition, out-of-body experiences, and on 2 occasions, physical levitation. I know how that must sound, but I can tell you I have since documented about 20 cases at last count of people who have physically levitated following their encounters. It happened to Whitley Strieber, very well known in this field. It happened to Stephen Greer, also very well known. Bud Hopkins, a prominent researcher, had a number of cases. So these are the sort of things that I think deserve more attention. The UFO experience is, generally speaking, while can be quite frightening, ultimately a very positive, transformative experience, can affect, as I said in the beginning of this presentation, a person on multiple levels: mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. Artie Six Killer Clark had a case involving a bicycle racer who, after his encounter, started winning all of his bike races. We've got several cases of people following their encounter, their IQ went up many points. So that it actually will increase a person's intelligence quotient as well. think this is an important aspect of UFO encounters that really people need to know about. Our government is putting forth a false ET threat narrative. There's a lot of buzz about an upcoming false flag where they're going to stage an ET invasion. Don't believe it for a second. It's not true. ETs have been around for a very long time. They're not here to take over. I have no evidence of what I would call sadistic or torturing type of behavior where ETs are, I want to hurt you. No, it's not like that at all. I will admit that people do have negative experiences, often because they're extremely fearful, panic-stricken, and don't like it. And I totally understand that. It can be very frightening. But I'm here to tell you that ETs are not here to hurt you. The idea of this is ridiculous. They're not only technologically advanced, they're spiritually advanced, morally advanced, ethically advanced. There's no evidence that they are here to take over or eat us for lunch or anything like that. It's quite the opposite. So that is my presentation today. I really want to thank you for listening. And I'm certainly more than happy to answer any questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Preston. That was a fantastic presentation. I have a few questions myself. We'll now open the floor also to audience questions. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a reactions option. You just click on that, and that should bring up a menu that has a raise hand option, and raise your hands if you have any questions. So go ahead. Please stay muted until it is your turn to talk. So I'll go ahead and start if nobody else is going. So I've introduced myself a bit in this way to the SUFON community before, but I'm a walk-in and also a lifelong ET and contact experiencer, probably multiple lifetimes. That's a long story, but I do have some questions and some things I've been trying to figure out myself, more of the deeper meaning and implications of, as it relates to especially the gray types. And my what I could call kind of a cohort, or kind of like a family of grays that I've been involved with, even my walkout before the walk-in was involved with. I've never gotten the feeling that they were of a lower density and that they cause any harm. I've never, as far as I understand, been implanted by them. I've never, as far as I understand, been scoop marked or anything like that. But I remember some more high vibrational, even geometric and positive experiences. However, I do know that they have been monitoring me in some ways, and probably some of my ancestors, as far as I know, of our genetics and monitoring our genetics in that way, and possibly even our reproductive, like many others, not just abilities, but if that happens. And so I've been curious about this interest of theirs in infants, especially, and some incidences I've known of and heard of would suggest that some of them are especially some groups of gray types, even the little greens and other gray types, aren't so friendly to infants, or can be harmful. So I know there's a spectrum of these gray types, but I've been trying to figure out what all of them want with infants and genetics. And Preston, I think you mentioned it fairly well earlier that some of them are interested in our emotions, as some of these groups don't have emotional potential themselves. But Preston, I'm just curious about more of your take and what you figured out about the overall gray interests, as you understand it, of infants and human genetics.
Yeah, well, it is all about genetics. As a lot of contactees have been told, as I mentioned, we are you, you are us, we're all one. It's come to my, I basically learned from the contactees. Everything we know about UFOs comes from the contactees. It's certainly not from the governments who are lying about this. It's clear they do follow families. They do have a strong interest in genetics and reproduction. I think that they are, a lot of people who are contactees have had their ancestry done in terms of genetics and do so show some unusual genetics. It's not unusual for contactees to have Native American heritage or genetics that date quite far back or are unusual in some way. In fact, Don Anderson, who I talked about, had uniparental dysautomy, which basically means the vast majority of his genetics comes from his father. Yeah, the ETs are very much interested in people on certain genetic lines. I think they're trying to preserve some of the best of human genetics. I'll just speak to one case about this involving a gentleman by the name of Jim from Gainesville, Florida, who had Greys show up, and he wasn't happy about him. He felt his encounters were somewhat traumatic and negative, but he was getting over his fear of them. And here they show up again. He's like, gosh darn it, if you're gonna take me, why don't you heal my hernia? And they said, okay, we will heal it. And they did. He said, why are you taking me? He was quite, impatient and a little bit angry about it. And they said, we are interested in your genetic potential to live a long time. And that really raised his eyebrows because his grandfather was 106. He has a lot of longevity in his family. And I do see an interest in really young babies. So they are following people, they're checking up on them at a very young age. We have a lot of contaminants and pollution and radiation going on our planet right now, causing all kinds of damage. And as I understand it, and talking to Dolly Safran, who is actually here in the audience, hi Dolly, I recognize a couple of you out here, hi Susan. They are basically doing their best to maintain our genetics, which are being subject to incredible destructive forces at this time, from chemical pollution, from fluoride intake, from pesticides, from gamma radiation from our sun, due to the, our magnetic fields are very fluctuating right now. Yes, some of the Greys don't have emotions like we would think of them. And I will point to, in particular, the little short 3-4 foot tall Greys, which many contactees, Dolly Safran among them, but Whitley Strieber and quite a few others, describe it as AI, artificial intelligence, biological androids, who are not emotional as we are. They're not really alive even. They don't live, they don't die. They are basically biological machines and don't understand emotions, and will tell people, don't be afraid, don't hurt you, because they are often the ones who are sent down to do work that can be more dangerous for the other Greys and to pull a person on board. So I've had people quite frustrated by this and say that they felt like they've been treated like a lab rat. They didn't ask for this. They didn't want this. It's incredibly scary. And next thing they know, they're being pulled on board and being physically examined, undressed, and they're fighting them tooth and nail. And when this happens, the ETs will often render you unable to move, and will also facilitate you forgetting, having missing time. according to several contactees, and Dolly talks about this in the book Symmetry. It's not really the Greys doing this. It's people, it's us, who are not emotionally ready to deal with these memories. The last thing Greys want to do is scare people or terrify them. So they will facilitate you basically pushing these memories into your subconscious until a time when you feel ready to deal with this. Yeah, I mean, they will show up when a woman is pregnant, just had their baby. It's all about checking up on the health. I'm telling you, and I know this is difficult for some people to believe, but it really is largely about healing. I'm not going to negate the fact that some people do have negative experiences, but I would also like to point out real quick, and this is a little bit of a tangent, that some of the negative experiences aren't ETs at all. There's something called MILABs, military abductions. This is a big problem because our government is putting forth, secret government, if you will, a false ET threat narrative and using mind control and nefarious methods to masquerade as ETs, and are doing horrible things to people and blaming it on ETs, and it's not. And I've run into this where people are like, you keep saying ETs are friendly. Well, that's not my experience. But I will say that, yeah, even people I've talked to felt like, I didn't like this at all. Ultimately, it's the physical exam, which at times can be painful, which is the worst that I hear. But I don't think ETs are intentionally hurting people or scaring them. That is not their agenda at all, though this does happen.
Okay, that's some great answers. As I mentioned before, I do also believe that this is just as our universe is massive, there's a massive spectrum of all types of groups and beings. I have a few other questions, but I'll let Rebecca and Mike go first. And if nobody else has questions later, then I'll raise my hand again. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Hi, Preston. I'm a big follower of your work, and Dolly Saffron too. So hi to Dolly. So I've been having an interesting discussion with someone on Twitter about this aspect of experiencers, contact with extraterrestrials having the ability to manipulate our perceptions, and that this other person was saying that, once you're dealing with somebody that can manipulate your perceptions to that point, that they could tell you potentially that we're not here to hurt you, that we're benevolent, and then you don't really have control of being able to have the discernment. I mean, I'm taking the position that, well, how is that so different from a person that can lie or deceive you, our own human abilities? Because I've known some really world-class pathological liars. But everything you're saying is that it's not really a true thing, that they are here to deceive us for malevolent reasons. And so this is the reason why I think this is a very interesting thing, is because there's a fine line between discernment, that something you have some way of verifying a fact, or the edge where it becomes almost a mental health thing of being paranoid, that someone is out to get you, that kind of negative thinking. How can one use their discernment in a situation like that to verify that the entities that you're working with are, not that they're benevolent?
Yeah, well, my heart goes out to everyone who has the contact experience, because I can tell you hands down, can be very traumatic for people, especially initially when you're waking up to it. It's not at all unusual for people to feel an incredible sense of violation. The loss of control is something a lot of people do not like. Someone entering into your room at night, it's like, wait, I didn't give permission for this. So this can be incredibly difficult for people to deal with. And trying to discern, is this good for me or isn't? Well, people are having nightmares. They're having PTSD. They're putting double locks on their doors. They're buying guard dogs. And I always ask people, well, let's go through your experience. What exactly happened to you? And again, the worst I hear is people feel like they're being taken against their will. They're being pulled on board a craft and being physically examined. They're undergoing extreme panic and terror. That's a negative experience, no matter how you slice it. No one likes that. But we experience this when we go to the doctor. Ask any doctor or nurse how they've been spit on, hit, attacked, and they are just trying to help the person. I think when a person is having contact, the best thing they can do is meditate, try to reach out to these ETs in a very calm level and open the lines of communication. And if this is something you don't want, if you want to end your encounters, you just say, no, I don't want this. Well, make that known. Put forth your willpower. Each person is an autonomous being. No one has the right to do anything to another person that they don't want. So I think part of the problem is people are saying no, no, no on some level, but on another deeper level, because we compartmentalize our consciousness to a degree, especially if you're not reached a level of spiritual evolvement of any degree. And one part of you is saying yes, and another part of you is saying no. And we've all felt mixed emotions. And should I, shouldn't I? I kind of want to, I kind of don't. And this can be really pronounced with UFO encounters because it's fascinating and interesting. You're like, wow. But at the same time, you're like, this is very scary. So yes, I think the best thing you can do is meditate. Write down all your experiences in detail. Some people go so far as doing hypnotic regression. I don't generally recommend it unless you are having extreme anxieties, which are crippling. You can't live a normal life. And this will open up and you'll get to some of the good part of your encounters. Because what happens is when a person has encounters and they have a strong fear response, that's where they linger. They're not getting to the good stuff, which has actually happened to them. But you can see it even in people. I mean, it's somewhat of a mixed bag for people. I think a lot of people who've had contactee experiences will agree how difficult it can be, isolating and frightening. But even people who told me, I don't like it, it's negative, I just don't like it. I'm like, well, have you had any benefit from this whatsoever? And they're like, well, yeah, I have all these out-of-body experiences. I have learned how to do healing. So recognize that you are well. You have not. I mean, you're still here on Earth. You're okay. So learn how to face your fears. Try to open the lines of communication, do the very best you can to overcome whatever emotional problems you're having with these ETs. If it's still something you don't want, well, make that known. I do know cases of people who have been able to successfully end contact, at least postpone it as well. Sometimes they will come back and they think you're probably a little more ready for it. I'm not sure if that completely answers your question, but I'm going to.
Well, I think I was trying to get at something at a next level, almost like a quantum physics level, where we, I mean, do we really know what reality is in a larger sense, or are we, because quantum physics is saying, and the paranormal is telling us that in fact reality is much bigger than this consensus reality that humanity has created and trained us from a young age to accept as what is reality. So if somebody is do we really know what reality is? You see what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Okay.
I think we do. And this is where I really would encourage people to use their analytic mind, look to science. The fact is we do live in a 3D reality world that follows scientific laws. It's not a matrix or something. And if you start raising your psychic abilities of telepathy and precognition and astral projection, you can experience that yourself, this greater reality. You can visit the other side and see what it's like and how your thoughts influence your perception.
Yeah.
So we have to recognize that we are autonomous, eternal beings. This is a safe universe. It is a three-dimensional universe. It's not a matrix or anything like this. There's no really good supportive scientific evidence that supports that scenario. And I'm kind of surprised by the traction that idea is getting. Yeah, consciousness does play a role. Our perception plays a role. We look through our experiences, at our experiences through our belief system. I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed who were sure they saw demons or something until they realized, well, gosh, it was wearing a jumpsuit. Demons don't heal people. So, I mean, this is a problem. We really need to sort of step back from our belief systems and stop trying to label everything and just look at reality and what we know. And true knowledge comes really only from experience. You can interview all the people you want. You can read every book and watch every podcast, but ultimately only you know what happens to you. So I think we have to trust our own senses and do our best to raise our awareness and build up your knowledge base, know all that is knowable, and move forward. And answers will come. It is possible to become spiritually enlightened. And this contact experience, this is what the whole presentation is about, is a huge boost towards that. And this is why I think contactees do have mediumship and all these abilities and have a leg up over a lot of people who are still very robotic in their thinking and behavior and very much not seeing the greater reality. But it's a difficult pathway to waking up and dealing with this. There's no doubt about that. I mean, this is hard.
Like some people who are very good at astral projections, they report that there's like different levels that they can go as they become more experienced. So, that's different types of psychic experiences. Mind expansion have people who have gone through these experiences, whether through astral projection or near-death experiences and things like that, and also psychedelic substances have reported these kinds of experiences of going to higher levels of existence. But I think that the key is developing our psychic abilities, because a lot of people say that extraterrestrials say that once you live in a reality where everybody is telepathic, that there is no more deception.
Yes, yay, I love that. Yes,
Yeah.
I could not agree more. Can you imagine if humanity really woke up to that? Greed and corruption and the lies would fall by the wayside. And you can see with contactees, they recognize each other. They are very good at reading people. You cannot lie to them. Not always, but it's amazing how profoundly psychic contactees are, generally speaking.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your thoughts.
My pleasure.
Thank you to Rebecca and your questions. Very good questions. And thank you, Preston, for your answers. And it looks like Mike left. He said he has to get going. So I'll keep my questions kind of brief for those who want to stick around, and anybody else who may have a question. Looks like I'm the only one right now. But I would like to just say that as a sort of a hypnotherapist and Reiki healer, in my more clinical and academic training and my experience, we as living beings are synergies of these biological suits, the animating soul that is really only a fraction of a much larger soul, or much large might not even be the right word, but a much greater soul that's living in the spirit world, primarily, whatever you want to call it, as well as our subconscious intelligence, which not only is hardwired into the body, but the subconscious I've found is its own realm too, that when we access it, that's accessing essentially the dream realm and the realm that ETs often live in all the time. So I think that also plays or melts into this larger reality that's beyond the filters that people live in of biological life. And so one thing I've learned and heard from other contactees and researchers is that, especially in gray contacts and some other ET contact situations, fear comes up, not because the ETs themselves are scary or threatening, but it's a subconscious reaction, not only a reaction within the subconscious, but I believe that when we encounter these entities, just their presence in these other levels of reality, because they are often aware on those higher levels and pretty much live in them, that forces our fears out of our subconscious to become our experience. And so I've found that my contact experiences have become a lot less scary once I did overcome my fears around all of that. And it really is about perception. So there's probably a lot more I could say on that subject. But my question is, well, first I want to say, Preston, some of the sketches of some of the Delta type crafts you showed remind me very much of, I don't know if you've heard of Jeff Silver, but the sketches and depictions he's shown of his the crafts he's seen in his contacts, and I think some of them were also a rounded Delta type. So I don't know if there might be a connection there, if some of those are the same beings, but an interesting connection there. By the way, we're going to have him on with us again on March 4th. I posted that on the meetup group. My question, though, if you can speak to it more, is about this common theme and element of contactees being on ET ships, but these ships aren't like the clunky technologies we use to fly. They are apparently half biological, half living beings, somehow not just paired with, but like one and the same with the metallic and the materials the ships are made of. Maybe they're alloys. And so I'm curious about the deeper implications you figured out, Preston, and know about of how consciously and psychically interacting with these ships, which I have remembered and done, the deeper implications of that, and how living sentient or consciously aware something can be paired with what we would normally describe as inanimate, unconscious metallic materials.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. That's something I've sort of grappled with very early on in my research, when contactees started telling me, like, I felt like the ship that I was seeing or was taken on board was itself an entity. And some people were able to describe this in more detail, and I think with more comprehension. But it really wasn't until I met Dolly Safran and did hundreds of hours of interviews with her to put together the book, because we go into quite a bit of detail. She's very familiar with the entity who embodies the craft that she's taken on board. She calls him Talata, and that he's a fifth dimensional entity, and that, yeah, you are entirely correct. These craft are partly biological, do have metallic elements to them, but are in essence a body. And we see this in some of the crash retrieval reports. There was some whistleblowers who are talking about some of these craft that are being held in various military bases across the US and the world. And one actually healed itself up. And others, they can't get inside. They don't know how to do it. Some they go inside and there's no discernible equipment or engine at all. They don't even have any idea how these craft function. And they won't, because these craft are psychically driven. And in essence are very much embodied in the same way we embody this third dimensional skin and bones and flesh. It's funny, just on a quick aside, people call leaving their body astral projection, which is a bit of a misnomer, because the other side is our true home, and we are projecting downwards into a physical body, which we operate to learn and experience the third dimension. It's not the other way around, as it's often portrayed or certainly experienced from this perspective. So yeah, I think that the craft are themselves alive, but only in the sense that it's a body that they inhabit or embody to a degree. And I talked to, here's another example, because Dolly again goes into detail about how she psychically hooks up the craft and is able to fly it by opening up a light gate and getting in telepathic communication with the Greys and the ship and all the coordinates she has to fly. I talked to a guy in Hawaii who had a similar experience, but wasn't able to describe it in great detail, other than when he was taken on board, he says it melded into his mind. He became one with the craft, and he could see his mental processes hooking up completely with the craft itself. And he felt like the craft was his own body and that it was part of him. So I think this is why it's so difficult for our governments to reverse engineer these craft to any great degree. I think reverse engineering has taken place to some extent, but we will never get to the point where we can build these craft like these guys do, which aren't built in like factories with an assembly line, but instead are a much more involved process involving a psychic technology that is so far in advance of our own. We are only beginning to get glimmerings of how this even works. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's very much a part of what we're talking about here. The importance of psychic abilities cannot be understated when it comes to the UFO phenomena. We're seeing this with a lot of researchers who are now realizing that consciousness plays a much more powerful role in all of this than we previously believed.
Yeah, I think that's from what I understand, a pretty good answer to my question. Something else I thought of while you were speaking is, I know it's Emery Smith, and I think some other secret space program, not just survivors, but experiencers, have discussed one way that these conscious craft are actually created, at least some of them. I think the black triangles, and I think that it might also apply to other ships, especially the more Emery once described a translucent jelly-like creature ship that also the being that rode it was also half jelly-like, basically made of its DNA, or vice versa. So, Preston, I think that this might tie in very well with what you were saying earlier from one story about someone hearing an ohm-like tone from the universe in a mantis experience. If some of these ships are indeed manufactured or created literally in the void of space, not on a planet, then I wonder if there's like a quality within the universe itself, just out in space, that life comes from, that in all of the vastness of space, there's this ohm tone from God's source, creator, spirit, whatever you want to call it, that maybe that quality in itself is what some ET races use to, I don't know, channel or imbue a consciousness into a ship that's created.
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent you're exactly right. From what I understand, these craft aren't necessarily built entirely in the third dimension. So there are aspects to them that are, what we would call perhaps interdimensional or higher dimensional. And so this makes it very difficult for us at a 3D perspective to understand what's going on, and they simply can't be built here because there are aspects to them that access those higher dimensions. And there are many people who've had contact experiences who describe it as being very much like traveling into the astral realms. So I don't think it's any coincidence that people are describing a lot of psychic transformation, very much like a near-death experiencer does, who comes away from their near-death experience completely spiritually transformed and starts having precognition and healing and astral travel and all of this, because being taken on board is in some ways like going to a higher dimension. And these craft themselves do have that ability. People, I still think we're dealing with extraterrestrials, don't get me wrong. I don't think they're time travelers from the future. I wouldn't call them interdimensional beings either, because we're interdimensional beings, and so is a tree. And all life has an interdimensional aspect, all matter for that matter. Everything has an interdimensional aspect to this. This is pretty much verified in quantum physics, and science is reaching out more and more towards understanding this, that there are other dimensions, that we're all a part of it, that the entire universe is integrated in ways that we don't fully understand. So yeah, I think there's absolute truth to that. And I find it interesting that when people describe what it feels like on board a UFO, or what the sound it makes, is sometimes that really musical sound, or a low sort of musical vibration that's very different from any machine here. And yeah, the ships are so far advanced. These guys are not just a couple of 100 years ahead of us, the Greys, the ETs in general. They are much farther advanced than us. And we as a species still have a lot of growing up to do. As a species which does, rape, murder, pillage, kill, genocide, we have a tendency to, what would I say, sort of place our own cultural values onto others. And I think we expect people to, behave the way we do. And so it's very difficult for us to understand sometimes the behaviors and the nature of these ships and these beings, because we're very much locked into our own belief system. And that's part of what the whole contact experience is opening you up to this whole other reality. And I think there probably are other species out there that are, still in the low stages of spiritual development on other planets, are probably quite hostile to each other and others. So I'm not going to say that there's no bad ETs out there, because look at us. we're ETs to anyone else in the universe, and we're not particularly, I mean, I would not describe us as anything but hostile at times. Not everybody, of course. I don't want to generalize, but I think this speaks towards the beings that are visiting us, being extremely technologically advanced as well as spiritually advanced, and that includes their craft as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like an all of the above answer to that question I asked. I do want to say that we've been at this for just over 2 hours. I had posted online that this would be about a 2-hour long event, so we could keep going if anyone is interested. If anyone has other questions, go ahead and speak up or raise your hand. It looks like a few people already left, and that's okay if anyone needs to leave to do something else in their day. Yeah, one last thing I want to say is I hope that, as I see it, we as a planet or a species on a planet are going through what I call the change period. I think all planets or all stars have to go through this. And our planet, according to the Toltec and Aztec and Mayan calendars and probably other systems, is waking up, and we're just going through a period that we have to go through and finish. And I hope that as my star family has explained it to me, that after this integration period or awakening and then integration period, I hope that as humans, we do get to clean up our behaviors and planet and get to the point of even learning how to manufacture our own conscious craft, maybe generations from now. We will see how that change period goes. So I think that's a really nice in-depth event that we've had. Preston, do you have any final words? Perhaps you can share more about yourself, upcoming books or developments, and how people can find your books and get a hold of you?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me present today, Troy, and everyone here who came. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days. I know we all have to work and live this life on Earth, which isn't easy. But if you want to learn more about my research, I do have a website, prestondennett.weebly.com. I have a YouTube channel where I'm putting out my research. I'm very much not putting forth my own agenda or what I believe. I'm presenting people's experiences in a facts-only manner. So you can certainly find all kinds of information about other people's experiences on my YouTube channel, which is true with my books as well, which you can find on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other online retailers. I'm all over Facebook and other social media platforms. Always happy to hear from people. They've got a comment or a story to share or a question. My primary goal is always to help people, whether you're having trouble with your contacts, if you're having negative or positive experiences. I'm happy to answer any questions and help in any way I can. And I really appreciate you allowing me to present today. I feel like this is an important subject and people need to know about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Preston. As a SUFON organizer, we have upcoming events, a camp out in July and one in August that is being planned. As I mentioned earlier, we have a number of events on meetup.com that anybody can view. Jeff Sober will be on in a month on March 4th with us. He will be going into depth about more recent developments in his contact story, and then talking with Ian Howling and connecting the missing 401 and missing persons phenomena with his contact story. And so I'm excited for that. But we're available or able to be connected with on Facebook and meetup.com primarily. I hope to get on their website for SUFON up perhaps this year. And I thank everyone who participated for listening and asking questions. And thank you, Preston, for your time and for sharing your stories and knowledge.
My pleasure. It's an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, again. Bye for now.